It's another beautiful April day here at KQAS, and we've got a great lineup of songs on the way. We've got our new metal power hour coming up with all the best new songs from your favorite extreme bands. But before that, we need to take a minute to pay some bills.
Hey folks, Uncle Dizzy here with another great deal for yous all. Our newly recruited inventory auditing team said we had too much on our hand, so we're passing the savings on to you. Just look at all of these mysterious boxes. What's in them? Are they empty? Are they packed with empty air duster canisters and oddly used brown paper sacks? Only one way to find out, I guess. Our legal team has advised me that I am obligated to tell listeners not to open any boxes while on Uncle Dizzy's property. Those who do waive all liability against Uncle Dizzy for anything that happens to them as a result of opening any box on the premises. So say bye to those other warehouse stealers and come on down to Uncle Dizzy's warehouse. Hello, and thank you for listening to Mapping the Zone, a podcast that is dedicated to highly fixated reviews of large, dense books, specifically the works and context of Thomas Pynchon. My name is Kate, and I'm one of the co-hosts here.
My name is Cody.
I'm Luke.
And I'm Will.
And welcome formally to the first episode of our fourth season of Mapping the Zone. As previously announced, this season is going to be covering the book Bleeding Edge by Thomas Pynchon. Bleeding Edge was published in 2013, and it is the most recent of Thomas Pynchon's novels. In my opinion, most likely his last. I really don't think there's much else for him to say at this point. But before we get into the sort of book proper, wanted to get everyone's sort of history with this book, their thoughts on it, and sort of where they stand before going into this discussion group.
Yeah, this was actually the last of his that I read. I think I got onto it so late because of the reputation that it unfairly has. And so I just kind of kept putting it off until I finished the rest of his books. And after reading it, I realized, kind of like Vineland, like the disdain that this book seems to have amongst the community is just completely unwarranted. I think it's a fantastic book. It's not my favorite of his, but I think there is a lot to appreciate in here, and I think that there's a lot worth discussing and analyzing. And I think maybe some of the dislike of the book may be a bit of recency bias. It may be the fact that it's, as with everything else that isn't Gravity's Rainbow, it isn't Gravity's Rainbow. So, I think it kind of unfairly gets this place in his bibliography just automatically of being the sort of baby of the group and therefore being, subpar or not worth a reread in some cases, which I think is just not the case. This will be the third time I've read it. I don't think I've read it in a couple of years at this point. So I remember the main points of it, and I remember, most of the characters, but I think kind of going back into it, it's going to be a nice little adventure and kind of bring up some old memories of this book, which I'm looking forward to.
Awesome. Luke, Will, one of you guys want to go next?
Yeah, so I read this book. I think, like Cody, it may not have been the last mention I read for the first time. I'm not super clear on my reading order in the past, but I read this about 8 years ago. I remember really enjoying it a lot. I think it's above some of his other novels in terms of how much I enjoyed it and how much I got out of it, at least that first read. It's the only one of his novels where I felt like I was really getting all the references, all the pop culture references, and stuff that Pynchon does. which is really nice. You know, we've been over this, I think, a little bit, but I'm around the same age as Pinchin's son. I spent the first 13 years of my life in upstate New York and visited New York City a fair amount. Not all the time, but maybe once or twice a year we would go to New York City. So I do have experience with you know, a lot of the stuff that Pynchon is talking about. Even in these first few chapters, the reference to the Razor scooters, you know, like that was a big part of my childhood, was riding around on Razor scooters. I can distinctly remember, you know, like the before and after in terms of like the different fads of that time. That being said, I for the other books we've done, the other seasons we've done on this show, I reread the whole book before starting this season. I didn't do that with Bleeding Edge. So it's a little bit more. I have a pretty vague outline of the book in my head, and there's some parts of it that stand out. But it'll be as close to a first read as I can probably get in terms of you know, it is a reread for me. It will be a reread for me as we go through, but I don't remember a lot of the details and stuff. And that being said, you know, like I said, I really enjoyed it. That being said, these first few chapters, I did enjoy them. That being said, I was a little bit it didn't stand up to how I remembered it in terms of the depth and the enjoyment that I was getting out of it. So I'm kind of curious to see if I'll be able to justify my earlier enjoyment of it as we go through it, just because I wasn't as hot on it these first few chapters as I remember I was years ago. So,
well, now that you've mentioned it, I just remembered that I could go get a Razor scooter that I think was purchased in 2001 or 2002. It's not in the room with me, but I should have brought it up, if only to spin its wheels on the microphone.
You have to record the next episode on the Razor scooter.
Honestly, I feel like the listeners have put up with enough on my end with regards to sound quality. I don't think they deserve that.
Yeah, this will make it better.
You'll sound faster. And
I'll
rad.
sound cooler.
Yeah,
Rad, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Hella sick.
Just get some Jinko jeans and you're on your way.
Right. Blast Limp Bizkit through your earbuds.
Hell yeah, man.
On your disc.
$19.99. Let's go. Family Value Store. We're on the way.
Yeah, dude. I am using my one of my old Pizza Hut free personal pan pizzas for summer reading certificates as my bookmark for this read through.
Oh shit, those got me through. Summers.
Yeah, it felt appropriate. So my history with this book is interesting. As I've said a couple of different times on the show, and I think in the bonus episode between me and Will, I read Inherent Vice and didn't understand it, and so then I thought to myself, well, A Bleeding Edge seems like a good place to go next, and I did not like this book the first time through, but I also very clearly didn't understand it. As the best example I can possibly give of that, I did not even understand that the book was about 9/11 when I finished it the first time through.
Oh, wow.
So my ability to comprehend this book really did not begin until the second time through, which was after I read Crying of Lot 49 and kind of started to piece together how to read his books and how to read like postmodern literature as a whole. And so I went back to it because I remember laughing a lot while reading it. I think this is one of his funnier books. Between all of the stupid .com website names and which are none of them are. I also want to preface this for any of our listeners who may be slightly younger, who didn't live through this era of history. These names are not out there. Like when we get to those portions where they mention different .com boom names, it's about how it was, and kind of still is with things like Uber or Lyft, spelled Lyft, or any of these different kind of weird tech companies. That's genuinely how it was. So I remember laughing a lot, and like Luke's point, I remember being able to relate to the setting and the material a lot. So I wanted to go back and read through it again. And when I did, I had a completely different experience. and really loved it. It wasn't until my third read through that I think it gained the position in my mind that I have with it now, of sort of this is Pynchon's like later Gravity's Rainbow. I made the audacious statement several episodes ago that if they wanted somewhat of a contemporary Bible in the same way that Gravity's Rainbow was to the 70s, then it would be Bleeding Edge. And that was really the result that I pulled out of my third reading of it. So going through it for the podcast here today will be my fourth read through of Bleeding Edge. And I'm very much looking forward to it. And, you know, I think that there's a lot of depth to be mined out of here that gets missed, and whether that is due to recency bias or whether that is due to just sort of, you know, this is different. There's not nearly as many songs in this book, which is great. You know, it is a bit different from the rest of his catalog. But I think it's different in good ways, and the fact that it is a bit more revealing, I guess I'll say, as far as what Pynchon is really talking about, or like what the messages are that he's trying to get across to his reader. There's less to decrypt in some cases, and I think that's a good thing. I think that as a book that is supposed to be, as I've said many times on this show, his kind of parting words to his readers, it functions better for it to be a bit more on its face and sort of cards on the table when compared to some of his other work.
Yeah, I'm with you in that I didn't enjoy it as much the first time I read it. I remember I read it and I thought, okay, that was fine. And that was, like I said, the last of his books that I read for the first time. And then I watched that was around the time also that I discovered the Book Chemist's YouTube channel. And I was watching a lot of his videos, and that was helping me a lot with learning how to read Pynchon's work. And he mentioned that Bleeding Edge was his favorite, and so I went and checked out his review of the book, and that kind of helped me catch the things that I think that I'd missed in my first go around of it, and helped me enjoy it a little bit more. So it's definitely one that, yeah, I think for a lot of people who read it once and just didn't necessarily gel with it, give it another go. I think it's really worth the time, and I hope that maybe we can help with getting more people into it as we go through it.
Yeah, absolutely. 9/11 was an end of history event, folks, and Thomas Pynchon regularly or very clearly understood that and wanted to make a book about it, which is principally what Bleeding Edge is about. Luke already kind of shared his thoughts on the first 3 chapters, so kind of going from there.
I didn't give my thoughts overall.
Oh,
I'm sorry. Yeah, go ahead, Will.
Just so for any listeners who've been paying a lot of attention might already know this, but this is the most recent Pynchon novel for me as well as. And in fact, I've only finished it right at the end of March here. And I spent the first half of the book thinking, well, this is going to be not a great book. And just really in the last quarter of it, it really came together for me. And it's still far from my favorite book of his, I think, at this point. But I've only read it the one time. And I think that it is doing a lot more than most people say. I'm not sure I would go so far as you, Kate, in saying that it is a new Gravity's Rainbow. But the sense I got from it is that of kind of a translation intermediate for Gravity's Rainbow to today. And I think it's fairly successful in that regard. And all in all, I like it quite a bit, even if I didn't find it particularly funny, honestly. I had a lot more fun with Inherent Vice and Against the Day and Mason and Dixon and probably even Vineland. But I really do like what the book is doing, and I found myself very invested in the characters, and I found myself really invested in the little mysteries throughout the book and the central one. So definitely not saying this as a criticism, but it is probably my second least favorite book of his. But there's a huge gap between V and this one for me.
Mm.
It's going to be interesting when we get to V.
just Will nonstop hating for however many episodes that runs for.
Yeah.
Well, I didn't hate reading it, but yeah, it will probably be notable how much less I am enthused by it.
There are some descriptions in that book that I love. Just some of his descriptive writing in that book is so good. But I understand he's still figuring it out as he published V.
Yeah, there are definitely scenes in V that I love and I think of quite frequently. But then there are also like stretches of 100+ pages where I'm just rolling my eyes. So
I agree with Will, honestly. V is far and away my least favorite Pynchon novel.
Well, you heard it here, folks. Going to be some hot takes when we get to that one.
So, moving on from overall thoughts, we heard from Luke as far as his thoughts on the first 3 chapters. Before we go to somebody else, did you say everything you wanted to about the first 3 chapters, Luke?
I mean, some of the stuff we'll get to, I hope, in terms of specific thoughts. I did read it, and then I listened to the audiobook of the first 3 chapters, and honestly, I do actually recommend the audiobook for this book, just based on the first 3 chapters, because I enjoyed it a bit more. And the at least the one on Audible, the narrator seems like kind of a cranky older woman, which I really enjoyed her voice and stuff. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, for just the first time through, I just kind of felt like it was just a little bit lean, a little bit kind of not super in depth, where we were kind of jumping from thing to thing, and I was a little bit annoyed that that a lot of it could have been a little more in depth or a little more explored more fully. Which we'll get to the specifics of that, I guess, once we delve in.
Yeah, 100%. Anyone else want to go next as far as their overall thoughts?
I mean, as far overall, I think these are good chapters. I think there's some fun stuff in there. I think does a pretty good job of laying the groundwork for, introducing us to some of these characters, and obviously they'll be more fleshed out as we go through. But I do think that it does some good table setting. Especially chapter 2, I think of the 3 of these chapters was my favorite. There's a lot of elements of the way he's telling the story in there that I really enjoyed. And obviously we'll get more to that when we get to that part, but overall, yeah, I mean, I thought it was good, not anything groundbreaking. It's not the greatest first 3 chapters I've ever read, but it does what it needs to do and sets everything up for the next set of chapters.
Yeah, Will, what about you?
I was surprised really off the bat how much the style of the book, but even more some of the technique reminds me of the Lot 49 Gravity's Rainbow. I guess you could call it a period of Pynchon's writing. And for me, if I'm being completely honest, outside of a few of the more like symbolic parts of these first 3 chapters, I'm really only enjoying the technique. Because sure, I enjoy some of the jokes in the dialogue, and I do like the characters eventually. But at this point in the book, I just kind of found it a little bit not tedious, but very much. It felt like Pynchon basically saying, "Hey, remember when I used to jump on tangents constantly with no sort of conjugation between paragraphs or even sentences within a paragraph? Wouldn't it be fun if I did that like a lot just to set the stage?" And I appreciate that on a very aesthetic level, but from the perspective of like, am I invested in the story at the end of these 3 chapters? Do I find myself interested in any of the characters? It's a resounding no, sadly.
You didn't enjoy Maxine's receptionist? Come on, Will.
I mean, I enjoyed...
She's great.
Well, yeah, but she gets like 4 lines of dialogue. And, you know, I like her as a character. But at this point, I had no real sense of attachment, I guess.
Fair enough, I suppose.
I would kind of push back on that. I see where you're coming from, absolutely. But I do, at least for me, Maxine and Reg are within these first 3 chapters. I kind of already want to keep reading about them. And yeah, Maxine's receptionist, and I can't remember her name now, and it is driving me nuts. She's funny, and her brief little appearances in here are funny, but I really like those 2 characters in particular, and I think this chapter does a good job of, for me at least as a reader, of not, I don't necessarily feel attached to them, but I definitely want to know more about them at this point.
Yeah, I definitely am intrigued by Maxine as a character, but reading it through the first time, it did feel quite a bit like the reason for that, personally, was just like, oh, hey, it's an Oedipa type again. And, Oedipa is one of my favorite protagonists of his books, so it was more of an intellectual curiosity for me than any...
I gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. But I get why all these little stories about Maxine's life, and particularly the Ambopedia cruise with Reg. I mean, there's a lot of endearing stuff in here. You know, I just don't believe her yet.
Fair. I think she's probably my favorite protagonist of any of Pynchon's novels. But we also share the fact that we're both Jewish women. So there could be something there. But I think she's excellent, and is a really interesting way to kind of translate Pynchon's love of hard-boiled fiction to having a woman as his protagonist rather than a man. Because as much as Oedipa is an investigator, she's certainly cut from a different cloth than Maxine is, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that the job of these first 3 chapters is really to kind of invite you into Maxine's orbit of just sort of like, this is how she lives her life as a certified fraud examiner, or a previously certified fraud examiner, as it may be, and kind of the strange characters that she comes across in that regard. I think it's also there really to set up New York as a character, because New York is certainly sort of its own character in this novel, as indicated by the epigraph of this book, which I think is an excellent choice for it. New York as a character in a mystery would not be the detective, would not be the murderer. It would be the enigmatic suspect who knows the real story but isn't going to tell it. And that's from Donald E. Westlake. If you're not familiar with Donald E. Westlake, if you're one of our listeners who doesn't read a lot of crime fiction, Donald E. Westlake was a pretty important writer for the crime genre. He's most famous for this series called the Parker book series, and it's I don't even remember how many Parker books there are. There's a lot of them.
A lot, yeah.
I think there might be as many as like 29 or something like that. But it's basically just the story of like a thief and a con artist. So it tells these crime stories from the perspective of a criminal, rather than sort of the detective or someone kind of looking into a case as maybe a private investigator or a retired cop or anything like that. He also wrote underneath the name Richard Stark. That's the name that the Parker books were originally published under. But he has a number of different series underneath his belt, underneath both names. Looks like there are 24 Parker novels.
Sounds about right. There was a lot.
Yeah, quite a bit. And I think that that epigraph really sets up not just what the book is doing, but what these first couple chapters are doing from a standpoint of like, this is where this book is taking place. These are the characters that exist in this kind of enigmatic suspect. And as the book unfolds, the idea that, these events are caused by different facets of people who live in this one kind of locale becomes very important. And so giving us sort of detail about the people and the places that exist in that locale is very important, which is really what these first 3 chapters are doing. There's not a lot content-wise necessarily to discuss, but I really enjoy it. I enjoy the sort of disjointed nature of it, the tangents and the returns. I think that he telegraphs some of those switches a lot easier than he does in earlier books. This is not a Blood and Vato situation. To harken back to a similar sort of kind of thing that we dealt with, you can kind of follow it along a bit easier, and it is all there to continue to do sort of the work of creating these characters, giving the reader an early impression of it, and I love what he's doing in order to do that. But I'm also a very big fan of this book, so. Those are really my thoughts on the first 3 chapters. So sort of moving into the first chapter, after the epigraph, we are introduced to Maxine Tarnow, our heroic protagonist, and her 2 children, Ziggy and what's the other boy's name?
Otis.
Otis, yeah, yes. Ziggy and Otis. Which just what an excellent pair of names for children. Mm-hmm. And he really wastes no time at all before he gets into just some incredible description. There's a quote that starts on the first page in my paperback copy where it says, "Sunlight reflected from the east-facing apartment windows that has begun to show up in blurry patterns on the fronts of buildings across the street. 2-part buses, new on the routes, creep the crosstown blocks like giant insects. Steel shutters are being rolled up. Early trucks are double parking. Guys are out with hoses cleaning off their piece of sidewalk. Unsheltered people sleep in doorways. Scavengers with huge plastic sacks full of empty beer and soda cans head for markets to cash them in. Work crews wait in front of buildings for the super to show up. Runners are bouncing up and down at the curb waiting for lights to change. Cops are in coffee shops dealing with bagel deficiencies. Kids, parents, and nannies, wheeled and afoot, are heading in all different directions. Directions for schools in the neighborhood. Half the kids seem to be on new Razor scooters, so to the list of things to keep alert for, add ambush by rolling aluminum." Just great. It's just as an opening to the book. After that brief sort of conversation between Maxine and her sons, it's very clear that Pynchon has lived in New York a long time, but he really does nail what it feels like to live in a city of really, I think, any size, as far as like a major city somewhere, in just a very simple paragraph, but does so in a very warm and inviting way. And that gets us to the Otto Kugelblitz School. Does anyone have any thoughts on the Otto Kugelblitz School that they're dying to share with the class?
It's a concept for a school that I do want to just point out, did anybody else clock the principal and how he's dressed specifically? There's a very specific image that popped into my head reading that description of him.
No, I think you might have discovered something I'm not familiar with.
The principal, Bruce Winterslow, acknowledging the equinox in a white suit and Panama hat, is working the crowd. That's the the dude from Jurassic Park. That's the dude that runs the island.
Yeah, you're right about that.
That's what I see now. It's John Hammond.
I would not trust John Hammond with my children.
Right. So it adds that adds to the whole general idea of what this school is all about with its weird kind of blending this anti-Freudian philosophy that was too much for Freud into their school curriculum. Not even the curriculum, just like how the school was structured, really.
Yeah, an asylum with homework.
Yeah, and it's it's not like that far-fetched of an idea now. That's the kind of thing that I could see happening in this day and age. But it's absolutely wild. That was really funny. Just reading that whole little section about Kugelblitz getting kicked out of Freud's office, and then coming up with the idea and securing funding and everything like that was a nice little way to plug in the idea of what we're going to get into with all the .com funding and taking these ridiculous abstract concepts and trying to find a way to monetize them and build capital off of them when there's really no tangible anything to be done with it. It's just a concept and you're paying for the idea of it. I just thought that was a nice little thing to insert that early into the book.
Yeah. Was someone else about to talk right now?
I was just going to say that I really like that little exchange, or not exchange even, it's just the one sentence from Freud.
Yeah.
It in itself, the layout of Kugelblitz's theories, and then that one line, I don't know, to me it reads as a very funny kind of just takedown of the like ultimate neuroticism of the psychoanalysts, the way that they kind of problematized the fundamental aspects of human life.
Mm-hmm.
It's just very funny.
It was great, yeah. Out of sort of an additional joke too, the name Otto in German actually means wealth. So as an underpinning of the fundraising aspect that Cody's talking about with the .com boom and all of that, there could be an additional joke in there that the Pynchon is making. Out of just sort of like general curiosity, I tried to figure out if this is like a real person or not. There's no like historical basis for that at all, but you will come up with an Operation Kugelblitz that took place in World War II. Kugelblitz is a German word meaning ball lightning, and it is a offensive designed to take out the communist regulars that were in one particular part of Eastern Europe by the Nazi army very early in the war, which I only mention not out of necessarily a belief that this is why it's named that, or it seems like a suspiciously specific name to pick, more than just for its humor aspect. But if we're looking at this book as an explanation of how something like 9/11 happens, which this is a spoiler show, I'm not gonna hold any of that back, as a book that kind of indicts the WASP apparatus for something like 9/11, it seems fitting that part of that apparatus is named after a fascist anti-communist war plan that took place in World War II. So even though it's not directly on the page, if he is making these references deliberately, there is plenty of meaning to potentially pull out of that.
I definitely think there's something there for sure. I think with Pynchon and his names, I think we've talked about this too before, is that I think there's always, they seem like these kind of absurd, silly, non sequitur kind of names, but I think there is genuinely reason for him doing what he's doing with the names, whether or not it's something that we're meant to get or if it's just a funny little inside joke for him. I do think there is always purpose in the names that his characters have.
Yeah, I agree. And that's the closest thing to a specific purpose that I could find for something like this. So after she drops off her kids, we are introduced to her local yuppie friend Virva. Does someone want to read the description of that character? Because it's great. She's such a wonderful character.
You're talking about on page 3?
Yes. Yeah.
Before they got to know each other?
Yeah.
Starting there? Okay. Before they got to know each other, Maxine would bring out herbal tea after putting on a pot of coffee for herself, till Verva inquired, pleasantly enough, like I'm wearing California plates on my butt or what? This morning, Maxine notes a change from the normal weekday throw-together, what Barbie used to call an executive lunch suit instead of denim overalls, for one thing, hair up instead of in the usual blonde braids, and the plastic monarch butterfly earrings replaced by what, diamond studs? Zircons? Some appointment later in the day, business matters no doubt, job hunting, maybe another financing expedition. I highlighted that section too because that really does such a great job of describing that character in a single paragraph. And just the very California-esqueness of her shining through in everything that she has on.
One thing I wanted to go back to with the school is it's just, and this isn't a major point, I guess, but it's just really weird to me that you would send a child to a school like this. With like each different grade is based on a mental condition. And it does kind of speak to, like kind of how odd all these characters are, especially, I mean, Maxine's a pretty odd character. It's just, I don't really know anyone that would willingly send their child to a school where like, like fourth grade is the schizophrenia grade or something.
Yeah, it is a weird one.
Yeah, it reminds me a lot of, and I think it might be supposed to be like a conscious parody of the Waldorf schools, which are designed as educational systems based on the theories of Rudolf Steiner, who is a not a great guy historically. He founded a field of thought called anthroposophy, which is a lot of interesting ideas wrapped around a lot of anti-Semitism. It's I don't know enough about the specifics of the Waldorf education system to say if there's something analogous to this, but I get the sense there might be.
Yeah, 100%. I think also, there is probably something in Pynchon that's also poking fun at Hebrew schools, which are strange and have their own systems of being set up in a lot of cases, especially in New York. And her family is Jewish. They're not going to a Hebrew school, but I'm sure that Pynchon has heard no shortage of strange stories from those that are out there in Brooklyn. As a brief note on Virva too, and I realize this is really early to be getting into conspiracy corner shit for this book, but
it's never too early.
There is a mention of her wearing these plastic monarch butterfly earrings. This is not the only time that plastic monarch butterfly earrings are mentioned in this book. Gabriel Ice, his wife, is also mentioned as wearing them at a later point in the novel. I bring this up, and you're going to have to follow me on a bit of a circuitous route here. I bring this up because Gabriel Ice is a novel insert for a real-life person named Josh Harris, who was a part of the .com boom. There's a documentary about him called We Live in Public that I recommended everybody watch, both on the show that our recording team here, but also you, the listener. And Josh Harris, his father was a CIA agent in South America, and he had a CIA therapist when he was growing up. And as a analog to his character in this book, it's curious that his wife wears them and that we see it brought up by another member of this kind of yuppie establishment. There is a very weird MK Ultra connected conspiracy theory online that has, as far as I can tell, has no basis in reality and is largely the delusion of one particular woman, called Project Monarch, that is supposed to be a intersection between MK Ultra's LSD experimentation by the CIA and Project Artichoke. And Project Artichoke was a subsection of MK Ultra that was designed to see whether you could get somebody to commit an assassination without them having a knowledge of it, like real Manchurian Candidate stuff. And the woman who propagated this idea of Project Monarch as a real thing, even though there is no documentation to support this does seem to be just a crackpot conspiracy theory, was that the CIA was also like ritually abusing children to break their minds and give them DID to eventually turn them into assassins as well. So there is a potential for a link there that Pynchon is even aware of the crazy underground conspiracy theory stuff as it relates to that, which does get interesting when the weird stuff with Montauk shows up later in this book. It's just something to note as we go through. Not necessarily that it's relevant to the text at this point in there, but it's the first time it comes up.
That does remind me of Slothrop's history from Gravity's Rainbow, with him being like his like conditioning as a child,
Right.
you
Yeah.
like being inappropriately like like what he went through was inappropriate for his age and stuff. So and it was it. I mean, it may not have been. I don't think it was in Gravity Zero. I don't think it's related to the CIA, but it is related to like the Ivy League and um, stuff like that. So
Yeah. That same like weird yuppie establishment, which is tied into, education, the government, all of that. So, yeah, just another thing to point out to look for as we continue on through the book. Anything else about the school or the relationship with Virva before we move on to the description of where Maxine works and what she does all day?
I just really love the whole like you can tell where River's from, and then it's cool to pinch in because that comes up in Vineland too a little bit with the differences between the East and the West Coast, which has always interested me a lot. Just kind of in general art that explores that. It's even a thing in like Mad Men and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I really enjoyed, having finished the book the first time, going back rereading these chapters for today. I really found myself enjoying Verva quite a bit.
She's great.
She's a really well fleshed out character, and I did some reading through the subreddit reading group, and I think for anybody listening to this, go check out those threads. There are some very interesting and very convincing dots being connected across various of Pynchon's books that make Virva even more salient as a symbol, I think.
Do you want to expound upon any of that?
Oh, I just skimmed that. I didn't have time to absorb it all, but
Okay.
Broadly, that her husband Justin may well be the son of Frenzy and Flash. Just a lot of little things that all in concert I found very not necessarily satisfying, but thought provoking.
Pushing past that character introduction, we have the quote: Maxine runs a small fraud investigating agency down the street called Talem and Nalem. Though she once briefly considered adding and Jalem, but grasped soon enough how wishful, if not delusional, this would be. Which is first of all, I love the name for her investigating agency. That's just great.
Yeah.
But the additional like small commentary there of like none of these people are going to jail is really great. I love that. I also really enjoy the joke in here that there's a dating service called Yenta Expresso in the In and Out travel agency. I don't know if that's directly a pun, but it feels like it could be. That there's a dating agency that probably is not a real thing. It's probably a front for something else inside a place called the In and Out agency. It's great. But I also just love that whole descriptor of the building that she works in. I think it's fantastic.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite parts of not just these 3 chapters, but the whole book is his descriptions of these kind of New York locales and whether or not they're real. Yeah, I mean, I think some of these he's fictionalizing the building names, but they're clearly based on real places in New York that he's describing. And having been to New York a couple of times, like it really is a fascinating place. There's a lot of really interesting architecture out there. I don't care for the big cities and stuff like that, so I don't think I could ever live there. But it is, just reading his descriptions of these buildings is just absolutely beautiful. And really adds to that whole New York as a character kind of element that runs through
absolutely. The book. And I think that is something that this book has that is very unique to his other work. He doesn't do a lot with setting necessarily. Like there will be background information as to where people are living. Like we know a lot about like how Vineland came to be a place, or in Mason and Dixon we get actual weather reports from the time that it was actually happening in real history, or he may describe what the destroyer that the the main characters of V are on, or something like that. But as far as like getting deep into setting as a character and like really describing the setting that people are moving through, I think Bleeding Edge really stands alone compared to the rest of his work in that regard.
Yeah.
Yeah, the part of that whole characterization of the city that I find the most impressive, I guess, is the way that he has taken his approach to developing character by throwing as much background information into as many possible points whenever they're in the scene as possible, to the city. Like, this whole paragraph is just basically describing the previous businesses that have occupied the same office building that hers does, that her business does, and it's just taking that from the person and putting it onto a building is both really funny and kind of spooky.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. So also like the last name, just to go back to Virva for a second, McElmo as a last name. Come on.
Yeah.
Like it's just, oh, I love it so much. So yeah, she goes into her office where Daytona Lorraine is loudly yelling at a man who may or may not be her husband. It's not necessarily clear to tell, but they do have some kind of relationship. And we get to just sort of know more about what she does for a living through the rest of this chapter. You wanted to talk about the Krispy Kreme conspiracy, Cody? You have it in the notes here.
Yeah, I just love that paragraph.
It is great.
I do want to read it real quick because it's great. This is on page 5. Some days it seems like every lowlife in town has Neal and Talem on their grease-stained Rolodex. A number of phone messages have piled up on the answering machine, breathers, telemarketers, even a few calls to do with tickets currently active. After some triage on the playback, Maxine returns an anxious call from a whistleblower at a snack food company over in Jersey, which has been secretly negotiating with ex-employees of Krispy Kreme for the illegal purchase of top-secret temperature and humidity settings on the donut purveyor's proof box, along with equally classified photos of the donut extruder, which, however, now seem to be Polaroids of auto parts taken years ago in Queens, photoshopped and whimsically at that. I'm beginning to think something's funny about this deal, her contact's voice trembling a little, maybe not even legit. Like, this is, we'll get more into this in chapter 2, but I really feel like this and Inherent Vice as well are his most like direct homages to the hard-boiled genre. But they also play a lot with that genre as well. And this is one of those, where you kind of have this like case where there's this mystery going on and someone's stealing something, but in this case it's like they're just stealing donut recipes, but there's this whole like seedy underbelly running about with like, are these pictures legitimate or are these just car parts, or is there something deeper than what we really think is going on here? And it's, the absurdity of this just being from someone potentially with the government stealing Krispy Kreme. And it's kind of alluded to that it might be like it's law enforcement, which just adds another layer to the goofiness of this whole thing. It just, that part just made me chuckle.
It's great. Yeah. What do we think of Dwayne Z Dizzy Cubits? Anyone have any thoughts on this character?
Just that that description at the beginning of page 6 just summarizes late night TV commercials in the early 2000s, late 90s so perfectly. It was a real Wild West of just the most absurd products being offered in the most absurd ways possible, but with this like almost super serious like undercurrent running through it at the same time. It was weird. But like I can see this person in my mind when I'm reading it. I can just see them, framed in a CRT TV.
And he's wearing a leisure suit.
2:00 in the morning. Yeah, he's wearing a leisure suit. It's so good. It's really funny.
Yeah, he's like the guy who ran the 9/11 mattress ad. That's the kind of business he owns, and that's the kind of ads that he definitely makes.
Yep.
I really love the description that we get of Dizzy. Though he has approached the gates of Danbury more than once. For those who don't know, Danbury is a prison that a lot of New York mafiosos got sent to if they got busted. Dizzy remains gripped in a fatality for sublegal choices. putting Maxine herself on moral pathways that would make a Grand Canyon burro think twice. The problem being Dizzy's charm, at least just off the turntable naivete that Maxine can't quite believe is fake. For the ordinary fraudster, family disruption, public shame, some time in the joint are enough to get them to seek legal, if not honest, employment. But even among the low-stakes hustlers she is doomed to deal with, Dizzy's learning curve is permanently flatlined. Which I love that description of just a guy who, he's just an idiot. Like,
Yeah.
He's not malicious. Like, he's not really, he's just an
stupid.
idiot. Yeah.
But it also it doubles it, in showing us a little bit about Maxine as well, and that these are the kind of people that she has to interact with, and she somehow is able to just kind of roll with the punches on these kind of guys, especially on the next page, where she's like walking around in his warehouse talking about like, these boxes are pretty obviously not filled with anything at all. Like you've got to do better. This is really, even for you, this is really bad.
Right. Yeah. Which honestly makes me wonder what she's actually doing. You know, like it seems like she's almost wanting to help him be a better fraudster.
If you're gonna do this, at least do it right, please.
Or just that, like, he has her on retainer to go down there every once in a while to check up on things to see how he's doing. And I do love the brief aside where it says, creeping around behind some auditing team, average age of 12, their firm being notorious for hiring solvent abusers, video game addicts, diagnosed cases of impaired critical thinking, and assigning them immediately to asset inventory.
Yeah.
I feel like that could be a knock at the young people who were in charge of the dot-com boom.
Oh, for sure.
And that Dizzy is just trying to hire young people because that's what all the famous people on television are doing, and all he can scrounge up for his terrible fraud-filled warehouse sales business are just a bunch of people who huff air dust.
The real bottom of the barrel, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I have a I don't know if it's quite conspiracy corner level or not, but yeah. I do have a question. Do any of you make anything of the specifics of having him wear a Crazy Eddie t-shirt when he is clearly a character that is like literally described as like almost in the book as designed to be a reference to Crazy Eddie? To me, it feels very much like kind of a sort of response to the attitude that, oh, Pynchon's books are based in an alternate reality, where it's almost like saying, no, this is real. This is a different person. This is obviously, it's fiction, but this is a real person who is not Crazy Eddie.
I mean, do you have a specific conspiracy, or is that pretty much just it? The idea that he is setting these stories in a real place. Yeah,
just just trying to situate the whole book in that frame.
I think you're right, Will. I think you've hit the nail on the head that he is, with this book more than others, trying very hard to make it clear that it's being set in a real place in time. Make of that, audience, what you will, especially as it relates to 9/11. But I do agree that I think you're correct, and that he is really trying to make it clear that this is in the real world as opposed to something else.
Grounding it, kind of, yeah.
Yeah. It also could be because Crazy Eddie, I mean, it had 3 revivals. He came back from bankruptcy 3 times, only to be bankrupt a 4th time and not come back. The last time he came back was 2012, so it could
Jesus.
I kid you not. It originally started in 1989. He came back in 2005, and then he came back again in 2012.
I knew he came back a couple times. I didn't know that 2012 one, though.
Yeah, so
wow.
it is entirely possible that just Pynchon was thinking to himself, what the hell? He's back? I gotta get this in my book. They did, however, have the best NASDAQ symbol. It was just CRZY. His NASDAQ
Oh my
ticker
god,
was just
that is
crazy. And I definitely, it is funny because like if we are saying that he's based off Crazy Eddie, which he obviously is, but just an even worse version of him. He's the son of Jews from Brooklyn, which means that they'd have that really sort of thick Brooklyn Jewish accent, which means that when Maxine runs into him in this chapter, it would literally let me find the page again. It would literally sound like him saying, "Oops, I did it again," as Brittany always says, which is just really something else. Anything else from chapter 1 before we move on to chapter 2?
no.
Okay. Oh man, so chapter 2 is our introduction to Reg. I love his backstory of him bootlegging videos and becoming an auteur at it. I don't know if that's a deliberate Seinfeld reference, but that same thing happens in Seinfeld in one episode.
It does, and I remember when in the press leading up to the book, he mentioned Jerry Seinfeld would be in the book, which obviously was just a joke. But I can't help but wonder if maybe he was just kind of referring to the fact that some of the ideas in here are Seinfeldian, and that one definitely is absolutely lifted from. Well, I can't say it's lifted from, but it definitely did happen in Seinfeld. I don't think to the extent I don't remember Kramer getting offered to have residency at a college, teaching his production efforts techniques, but he definitely was gaining some notoriety for his work for sure.
Well, Jerry bootlegged that one movie, and it was the greatest bootleg anyone had ever seen.
Yeah, that's right.
Right. And so the guy tried to keep forcing him by violence to keep bootlegging. Yeah, that's one of the better episodes of Seinfeld.
It really, it was. It's one of the ones that holds up.
Maybe that's all the joke that Pynchon made is just, oh yeah, Jerry's in there and Reg is Jerry. Like maybe that's literally all he was saying, which would make sense. It would make sense. I am glad that you left in here the fact that it's a VX2000, which was the skate video camera. Very true.
It was. Yeah. As someone who grew up in the 90s and was skating regularly at that time into the 2000s, I watched a lot of skate videos. And Same. I know that camera very, very well. Having never used it, I am fully aware of what it's capable of. And it's one of those things that as soon as I read it, I was like, holy shit, I remember those.
Yeah, Beagle still shoots on a VX2000 to this day.
Oh yeah,
yeah,
good to know. Yeah, and that's the other thing is I can tie that to my bonus episode because a later version of the VX2000 was what Inland Empire was filmed on. So there's that little weird connection to it too.
Interesting, I didn't know that. So that brings us to Hash Slingers. So Reg is there to ask Maxine to look into Hash Slingers because he's making a documentary about them. A documentary that seems to be more so an action movie than it is anything actually informative. Or
was intended to be, at least.
Yeah, exactly. What do we think about Hash Slingers?
That's one of those Pynchon jokes that I didn't get until much later in I think it wasn't until the second time I read it and I looked it up because I knew Hash Slinger is like from the food concept of like diners and truck stops and all that, like the cooks there are called Hash Slingers. But knowing that it has like there's a connection to I think, and someone who is better with computers, please correct me if I'm wrong, but it has to do with like coding names using numbers or something like that. I'm sure it's more complicated than that, but it that's my understanding of it in a very base sense. So it does have an actual technical term that I just was not aware of for the longest time. And now every time I see it, that's where my mind goes.
Yeah, I pulled the description from the Pynchon wiki because it seems important. Producing hash values for accessing data or for security. A hash value, or simply hash, also called a message digest, is a number generated from a string of text. The hash is substantially smaller than the text itself and is generated by a formula in such a way that it is extremely unlikely that some other text will produce the same hash value. Hashes play a role in security systems where they're used to ensure that transmitted messages have not been tampered with. The sender generates a hash of the message, encrypts it, and sends it with the message itself. The recipient then decrypts both the message and the hash, produces another hash from the received message, and then compares the two hashes. If they're the same, there's a very high probability that the message was transmitted intact. Hashing is also a common method of accessing data records. Consider, for example, a list of names: John Smith, Sarah Jones, Roger Adams. To create an index called a hash table for these records, you would apply a formula to each name to produce a unique numeric value. So you might get something like, and then it has random number generated numbers in front of the same names. It says, then to search for the record containing Sarah Jones, you need to reapply the formula, which directly yields the index key to the record. This is a much more efficient way of searching than going through all the records till the matching record is found. So creating hash records is both security, but also sort of filing and data collation is what it's used for, which does get into what is going on between them and Deep Archer later in the book. So it does make sense from a real life perspective that this is what Gabriel Ice's company would be doing.
Yeah,
it's a former. Sorry, what were we going to say something?
I was just going to say it's very much that kind of late '90s hacker humor.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, as a former stoner, it definitely, whenever I first read this book, I was smoking weed a lot back then, and it did strike me, like hash slinger would be a name for a weed dealer or something, which doesn't really come into play in this book at all. This book doesn't have, I don't think, any references that I can remember directly to marijuana. That being said, the last time I was in New York City, and I think this has happened before to me, people would come up to me and hand me business cards for I think semi-legal or just straight up illegal weed delivery services.
People do that where I live too.
Yeah, it's definitely a thing. It's a bit. I mean, I would walk down the street in New York City, and every car would have the little business card on the windshield, and they all have kind of catchy, memorable names. So it has occurred to me that the name hash slingers could be kind of, maybe not a direct reference, but just kind of a New York City thing where people do that. I don't know. Like I said, that's probably a bit of a stretch, and it's probably more based on the fact that I was smoking a lot of weed whenever I first read this book. But it did strike me that there is a possible connection to, marijuana culture there that I'm not sure is actually in the book, but it was something that I was kind of focusing on. I didn't really find anything there when I read it the first time. Yeah.
Yeah, let nobody be under the illusion that 90s hackers were not smoking a ton of weed.
Yeah, there is that. Yeah.
So I think that within the universe, it's probably a very intentional triple entendre.
And I will say, having recently read Cryptonomicon by Neal Stephenson, for people who like this book, check that one out as well if you haven't, because it deals with it takes place in two different timelines, in World War II, but also in kind of an early 90s, early to mid 90s era as well. But it deals with encryption very, very heavily and kind of along the same lines as what they're talking about here with the hash slingers thing. So that's a really, for people who like that kind of cyberpunk element to it, that's a good one to check out as well.
Another one would be Hard-Boiled Wonderland and the End of the World by Haruki Murakami. There's an interesting aspect of security and decryption. It's this, in his world, human beings have the ability to store a certain number of gigabytes of information in their head, and in so doing it encrypts and decrypts the information, and so to be a courier in that world, that's what you have to do. So there's a lot of interesting stuff as it relates to computer cybersecurity in that book as well, albeit from a different sort of perspective, more fantastical one. We also are introduced, obviously, to Gabriel Ice because he's the CEO of Hash Slingers. As I've mentioned, Gabriel Ice is a stand-in for Josh Harris, by all accounts. Later in the book, he is described as throwing parties just like Josh Harris's parties. They literally reference Josh Harris in that segment of the novel. And we get the first description of him on page 10, where it says, cover stories in the trades, one of the boy billionaires who walked away in one piece when the dot-com fever broke. She can recall photos, off-white Armani suit, tailor-made beaver fedora, not actually bestowing papal blessings right and left, but prepared to should the need arise. Permission note from his parents instead of a pocket square. I could read as far as I could. I'm not, like, gripped. He makes Bill Gates look charismatic. Which is... Bill Gates is not a he's a boring guy.
He's
always has been.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Pretty vanilla.
Absolutely. So that's quite a dig. I suppose for our younger listeners too, if we have them, I don't exactly know what the demographic of this show is. It might be worth it to explain what the .com fever breaking is a reference to. Cody, do you have an? I don't think I could explain it without going on for 30 minutes, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, I'd probably be the same. I mean, basically, it essentially, and I may be wildly under explaining it here, but basically similar to like the housing market bubble that happened in 2008.
Mm-hmm.
You had all these like this was the time, the early mid 90s, like 96, 97, is when the internet really stopped becoming a very sort of isolated group of computers networked together to being more of a worldwide phenomenon. And you had, obviously, with the creation of this sort of new playing field for businesses, you had an explosion of businesses that came on as a result of that. So what happened was, for those first few years from 97 to about 2000, 2001, everybody had a website. And everybody had an idea, and they were, all these investors were out throwing money at literally anyone who had an idea, hoping that there would be a return on investment. The problem came where there was nothing. You're basically throwing money at ghosts. Mm-hmm. There's no actual product there. These were people were buying ideas and nothing else. And so what happened was you inflated the market so much that eventually it got to a critical point of overload, and it all just collapsed. And so all of these businesses, I say businesses with extremely heavy air quotes, because most of them were nothing more than just a concept. You're buying ideas. It was basically like, wouldn't it be cool if idea? And here's $17 million, make it happen. And it was, I think maybe the best way to explain it is, this is going to go even further back for people who may not know. It's like if you took Andy Warhol's Pop Factory and multiplied it by millions, and everyone thought, that's a good idea, I'm going to give them all of my money. And so now you have all of these people with all of this money and nothing to do with it. And you couple that with the fact that really the money that they're being given isn't real in the first place. This is all spec money. So it all just eventually collapsed in on itself. Tons of people lost jobs. Tons of people lost lots of actual money at that point. And when the dust settled, you had a handful of viable websites that actually could survive and did. That's exactly where Amazon came from. Yep. Was the collapse of the .com market. Because Amazon had a tangible business that they could operate and continued to operate. And because there was literally no competition for them after that, that is how they expanded into what they have become today. Yeah. There was a few other, you had a lot of search engines that had the same kind of situation as well, but
which some of them are mentioned in these chapters.
Yeah, for sure. Alta Vista, I'm looking at you.
I really feel like in hindsight, the couple of things that really I think might communicate to those younger than me what this was like is, this is where Amazon came from. This is also where Mark Cuban came from.
Yes.
And this is where Elon Musk came from. Mm-hmm. And Elon Musk, even though 2012 was before he really became relevant to anybody in a real sense, he was part of the founding team of PayPal. And if anyone's been confused about the whole why it is Twitter being called X and all of that, it's because in 2000 or 2001, Elon Musk got it in his head that his next business would be X.com, which could do anything. This was basically his business pitch, by the way. I'm not simplifying it.
He's not.
His idea was it's called X because X is a variable. So the website can be anything. Money, please.
Yep.
And yeah. these business ideas, like Cody and Kate have said, these are not absurd. These are the kinds of ideas that were getting money in the late 90s. It's crazy.
Yeah. As someone who was forced to watch 60 Minutes with her parents every single night,
You too?
oh yeah. That
Yep.
is
Rent-free in my mind.
permanently stuck in my head.
Uh-huh.
The amount of idiotic.com business people that I had to listen to get interviewed nightly during this period was insufferable. You had people going on there who would just say stuff like, we recontextualize outcomes for businesses. And then someone would just say like, but what does that mean? And then they would just basically repeat themselves.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, like the .com boom is where we get the concept of like an internet startup.
It's like if sovereign citizens decided to make websites. That's actually pretty solid descriptor. Just people just playing with stupid amounts of money. I guess a super like recent comparison to point to would be like the crypto boom from like 3 years ago, like crypto and NFTs. Yeah.
How all of a sudden there was a million different NFT companies, a million different like, altcoins or litecoins or whatever term you want to apply there, and then it all crashed and you're just sort of left with Bitcoin and Ethereum. Post.com we were left with pets.com lasted a little while.
It had a good run.
But they died pretty quickly. And we were left with, like Will said, Amazon and Elon Musk and all of these guys.
I mean, you could also circle this whole thing to, as with other of his books, this is a condemnation of hypercapitalism and what happens when you have this like gross amount of money and nobody's concerned about anything else other than how do I make more? How do I get more? It's essentially what caused and destroyed all of that .com.
Yeah. And in service, I guess, of further translation of this book's themes to younger people, the notable thing that changed the internet between 1997 and 2003 was the rise of PayPal and the rise of ad networks like Google.
Mm-hmm.
Those were the things which allowed the internet to become commercialized. To become commercialized. Simply, people who are willing to take on the burden of card processing regulations, and people who were beginning the process of surveilling everything anyone did on the internet.
You remember when Google's slogan was "Don't be evil"?
It was their mission statement, actually.
Yeah. Don't be evil. Hilarious. Fucking hilarious. I also want to briefly, before we move on from this like introductory section to Hashslingers and Gabriel Ice, to mention the quote in here. It says, according to Eric, a purpose on Earth written in code none of us can read, except for maybe 666, which tends to recur. Remind me, you still have that concealed carry permit? That specific mention of 666 recurring, yes, there is the obvious comparison to like Revelation. Another important thing, though, is that 666 is present in every single barcode that's ever existed. And that is the reason for the satanic panic as it relates to barcodes. If you were alive when barcodes became a thing, there was a lot of people assuming that barcodes were the mark of the beast as laid out in Revelation, simply because each barcode had 3 6s in it, that we were all going to get barcodes tattooed on our head, and that was how the Antichrist was going to come about. So there is some potential later context for why 666 comes up in the book, but it could also be a reference to the fact that in computer coding, specifically for like data storage and information sorting, which barcodes ultimately, that's all they are, that set of numbers shows up a lot for some reason.
Well, it's because of Satan.
Yes, yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
Let's not beat around the bush. Satan is real.
That's the real That's the real conspiracy.
That's what. Look, let's cut to the chase. That's what this book is about.
That Satan is real. It's about the. it's about the
about
country
the
album.
literal devil.
Like, look, you're the one who called it a Bible. This is the deity.
He's got you. He's got you there.
Yeah, this is true. I can't disagree there. Yeah. Yeah. Your homework, everybody, is to listen to the Leuven Brothers album, Satan is Real. So that brings us forward to is the Ambipedia trip is where we go from here, which is how Reg and Maxine first met each other. Well, I don't even really know where to start with this.
Yeah.
We figure out that Maxine used to be married to one of my favorite names, Horst Loeffler.
It's a real mouthful of a name.
Yeah, which Loeffler is the German name of a spoonbill.
Yep.
And that's an ugly animal. I don't know if choosing that name.
What did a spoonbill do to you?
Am I wrong?
No, but it doesn't deserve to be called out like that.
It could be. There
could be spoonbills listening right now.
That's so true. I'm so sorry to any Threscamorde that are listening to this.
Spoonbills that are listening, we apologize.
Any ibis that are listening. So that could just be a joke about her husband's nose being large. It could be, who knows? But I love the name because it does not roll off the tongue. Horst Loeffler might be one of the worst pinch-on names to say out loud. But he and Maxine were married, had 2 kids, and then in the process of getting divorced, Maxine decided to go to the In-N-Out travel agency, which is covered in dust from head to toe. I love the description of the travel agency in the book of just every surface is covered in dust. There's a diorama of the Titanic in there for some reason, which is a really good omen for who you're about to contract your travel with. And she books herself a little cruise getaway for a price that is seemingly impossible. And it turns out she is on what is a tramp container vessel, which, if you don't know, that's basically just a barge that would have a whole bunch of storage crates on it. And even funnier is that it's chartered out of Hungary. Hungary is a landlocked country. There's no ports in Hungary, so for them to have transit barges is really unlikely, and really adds something extra to the skeeviness of this cruise, quote unquote, that she's been booked on.
I also learned from the Pinch on Wiki that Aristide Alt was the stage name that Bela Lugosi used when he made silent films in Hungary. So there's that layer to it as well.
It's just so great. There's so many jokes in like the one sentence description of the ship that she's giving on.
I love it. And the fact that she got on there because of a what's referred to as a cancellation, but it might be something else, who knows?
Yeah, right. Does anyone want to describe maybe just read the quote of the Ambipedia convention where it's introduced?
Sure.
Go ahead, Will.
It wasn't till her first night out at sea that she learned she'd actually been booked into Ambipedia Frolics 98, a yearly gathering of the American Borderline Personality Disorder Association. Great fun. Who would have dreamt of canceling unless... She gazed back at Heidi on the pier, possibly having some schadenfreude, diminishing into industrial shoreline, which by now was too far away to swim to.
Okay, yeah, so she's on a boat full of people with BPD, which is real great, and Reg is there filming on his VX 2000. just taking video of the surroundings and the party, and kind of seeing maybe a similarly sane friend to her. She decides to just follow him around for the night, and we are treated to a series of conversations with the people who are a part of Ambopedia, which are great. Old guy who collects stamps is one of them. A woman who's obsessed with Dynasty is another one. Which, if you're going to be really obsessed with television like Pinchon was, I feel like that's the only way you end up watching Dynasty.
It has to be.
I don't think anyone's choosing to watch Dynasty out of a desire for riveting television.
Well, to be fair, it's not just that she loves Dynasty and she also watches a lot of TV. She has all of the episodes recorded on Betamax.
Yeah,
and rewatches them on repeat.
This is the superior tape format.
It really was.
A, yes. B, I cannot imagine watching a show like that more than once.
Oh, I thought you were just going to stop the sentence there, because that would have.
Well, I'm not going to judge people's taste in soap operas.
True,
they're fun.
True.
But yeah, geez, like, I've
But
never
that's what you had to
seen
do
Dynasty,
then.
to be fair. So maybe I'm getting it all wrong. I'm just imagining Dallas.
There were so many layers going on in Dynasty. I mean, it demands multiple viewings, and we didn't have DVD releases then. You didn't have any other choice other than you record it with the commercials, and you just file away all of your tapes in a very large drawer under your TV, and come back to them whenever you want to rewatch that show.
Yeah, it's perfect.
It was the life I led for quite a while.
Oh, I remember that. My copy of Spider-Man 2 was recorded on VHS off the television, and I fell asleep partway through recording it. So the tape kept recording, and it picked up the first half of Scream 3, which was on TV after that. And so for the longest time, one of my VHS tapes had Spider-Man 2 and the first half of Scream 3 on it.
A feature and a half.
Yeah, exactly.
See, if you had been using Betamax, you would not have that superfluous data.
True.
You would only have the first 80 minutes of Spider-Man 2, but you would not have that useless Scream 3.
Yeah, very true. I also prefer Hydrox.
So,
Speaking
it's funny
of
you mentioned
knockoffs,
that. My son just learned about the Hydrox Oreos thing not too long ago, so I've been hearing about that a lot.
You can still order them; they're still around.
I believe it. Yeah. The superior sandwich cookie.
I have two different questions for y'all. Number one is, why do you think that Pynchon chose borderline personality disorder for this cruise?
To be honest with you, I think it's so that he can make a joke about them doing their events on actual borders.
Yeah. And to introduce all these, I think, to set up having a room where you have a stamp collector, someone obsessed with Dynasty, and people pretending to be James Bond, that you can play with. It's a fun sandbox to exist in, I think.
Yeah, Will.
No, you go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I love that just brief description of a bunch of people pretending to be in a James Bond movie while they gamble with fake money. Like, that was something that made me laugh for the longest time when I read it. Oh my god.
Generic undiagnosed James Bond syndrome.
Yeah, it's so funny.
Okay, so I had to check this, but it turns out that borderline personality disorder was provisionally invented, because all mental illnesses are on a schematic level invented in the DSM-3, but the actual modern conception of it was only really published in the DSM-4, which came out in 1997. So I think on some level it might be just hey, we got a new toy as an author to play with, but also maybe something to do with I don't know. I can't get to anything concrete on the other end of that thinking. So
No, I think you could be right about that for sure.
Yeah.
Which I mean,
1994, sorry.
which they basically make a reference to about the James Bond syndrome. Like, yeah, it didn't make it into the DSM this time, but maybe next time.
Yeah.
Give it another go.
Can I just say I love the Jujubee nickname?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my god.
What was your other question, Luke?
This is a bit more specific, and I already kind of have my own little theory, but I don't. The Ambopedia Frolics with an X 98. I just was curious about the word frolics, because the only thing that brings to mind is the Philip K. Dick novel, Our Friends from Frolics 8, which I have not read, but I do own a copy of, and I'm looking at the Wikipedia for it, and I'm not seeing really anything that I could point to that would like be like, this is why he included that word. Personally, I think it's a reference to like the word frolic, and it's just a kind of like, yeah.
I think it's that, and it's just that was the late 90s, early 2000s, like, let's intentionally misspell everything because it looks cool and it's eye-catching kind of thing. That's just where I went with it initially. The Philip K. Dick thing could track. I don't know enough about that specifically, but that, yeah, it could be that.
Yeah, I feel like it's a Philip K. Dick reference. I mean, Pynchon had to have been a fan of his work. I can't think of anywhere where he's explicitly said so, but
Yeah, the Pynchon wiki for Vineland, I think, points out a few different possible references to Philip K. Dick in that book. So
yeah, I definitely think you're correct about that, Luke. Because the only thing when I tried looking it up was apparently there's an Indian soap company called Frolics. I don't think he's making a reference to.
Yeah, I was leaning towards the 90s edginess, but you gotta bring in the fact that also credit to the subreddit discussion threads for pointing this out, that Ambopedia is an anagram for Oedipa Bam. I don't know what you're gonna get out of that, except that there is a reading that like circa the 60s, the conception of borderline in psychology would be closer to the modern conception of like schizophrenia and stuff. So it could be something along the lines of these are the descendants of Oedipa frolicking, but that's real stretching.
to go to the borderline personality thing, I have had some people I've known in the past that have been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. It's a really tough like diagnosis to get, I know, for people. And there is a large part, I think, of borderline personality disorder is struggling with like attachment and being abandoned, which I do think could play into the fact that Maxine probably feels abandoned by Horace. I'm not saying, I don't think Maxine fits the part, like the symptoms of borderline personality disorder, but I do think that could be an aspect of it where her husband abandons her and then she goes on a trip with all these people who really struggle with abandonment. And I do wish that we kind of saw more of like the symptoms of borderline personality disorder displayed by these characters. That being said, I know that risk taking is a big part of the diagnosis and the symptoms, and even just like the gambling. That would be kind of if you're gambling with real money, that's obviously risk taking. So the fact that they're all like getting together to kind of have fun and celebrate, that'd be kind of a safe way to do some risk taking, is gambling with fake money. And then later on, we do get them arriving in the Caribbean, and I would say that like drinking the Mama Joanna with the love spell on it, that would definitely be an example of risk taking. And there does seem to be a lot of partying going on whenever they're in the Caribbean, which would fit in with that as well.
Yeah, I have to say I have a few people have had a few people in my life with borderline personality disorder, and so when I saw this pop up, sure, Pynchon has been broadly respectful of mental illness throughout his bibliography, but 2012, maybe he's got some dementia going. I was really worrying that it was going to be a lot of lampooning the very extreme stereotypes. I was impressed at the delicacy.
Yeah, they're just kind of slightly eccentric, normal people.
Definitely no weirder than the average people that we see Maxine run into on the street.
Yeah,
For sure, yeah.
yeah, definitely.
That's true. Yeah.
So speaking of what Luke just brought up, they do go to the Dominican Republic. This year, the trip is headed to the border between the Dominican Republic and Haiti. We do get a reference to the Perejil massacre or the Parsley massacre. For those who don't know, this was a genocidal massacre that took place in 1937, where the U.S.-backed President Trujillo decided to make his stance on Haitians known through violence by killing somewhere around 20,000 ethnically Haitian people who were living on the border between the Dominican Republic and Haiti. And if we're once again looking at this book as an examination of how the sort of elite U.S. establishment WASP network, controls these incredibly negative events, Trujillo was a dictator put in place by the U.S. government. His rise to power was really shepherded by relationships between the U.S. military and the CIA and the Dominican Republic. So it does not escape notice that this is referenced while they were there. But other than that, they get to have a good time. Yeah, eating some local food, drinking some local drinks. And it is actually somewhat of a real cruise, despite the earlier indications that may not be the case.
It is nice that it was real food and not what I would normally expect from Pynchon of these horrific creations of grotesque ideas thrown together. So that was refreshing. I think there's more of that. There's not as much food necessarily in these, at least in these 3 chapters, but I think that it seems to have been supplanted by the descriptions of clothing that people are wearing, especially like when we see Gabriel Ice and earlier with the principal and the kind of garish outfits that they have. It was nice to have, my expectations subverted, where I was expecting this is going to be something awful that's being offered up in the food here. And no, it was all very pleasant, Johnny cakes and the chimichurros. So yeah, it was good.
So I have to disagree there.
Uh-oh.
And I'm currently blaming the Pynchon wiki. The Pynchon wiki says under chimichurros, possibly a misspelling of chimichurris. I don't think that's what it is, because chimichurris is not really a thing. Like chimichurri is a salsa or a seasoning
ingredient.
So the way I read it is that it's churros.
It's churros dipped in
chimichurri,
the dessert,
which is a horrible idea.
That's true. That's true. Jesus, I missed that.
It's if you haven't had chimichurri, it's a lot of parsley, some basil, oftentimes cilantro, a lot of very green herbs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's delicious. It's really good when it's on food it's belonging on.
Yeah, it's great with roasted vegetables or even just
eggs.
Bread, meat. It's delicious. Not with sweet.
Not on a cinnamon dessert.
Pastries. Yeah.
Yeah, that's unfortunate.
However, Mama Juana is delicious. Definitely recommend it for anybody who gets the chance. Throw some red wine, rum if you want, honey into a mason jar with a bunch of cinnamon. Tasty.
Yeah, I'll have to try that. So then kind of pushing forward to the end of chapter 2, we get sort of Maxine kind of thinking about the fraud examiner license that she used to have, the events that led to her losing said license, and then finally the logo for the CFE on her decertification letter, which I'll read this quote here. The stationery on the decertification letter the stationery that the decertification letter came on was pretty fancy, worth more than the message, which was basically fuck you, plus canceling all her privileges at the 8th Circle, an exclusive CFE's club over on Park, with a reminder to return her member's card and settle her bar tab, which showed a balance. There did seem to be a PS at the bottom, however, about filing an appeal. They included forms. This was interesting. This would not go into accounts shreddable, not just yet. Alarmingly, what Maxine noticed for the first time was the association seal, which showed a torch burning violently in front of and slightly above an opened book. What's this? Any minute, the pages of this book, maybe allegorically the law, are about to be set on fire by this burning torch. Possibly the light of truth? Is somebody trying to say something? The law in flames here, the terrible, inflexible price of truth. That's it. Secret anarchist code messages. I have a whole thing about this, but before I get into it, does anyone have any thoughts on this section of the chapter?
I just want to say there's a lot to unpack in that paragraph.
Mm-hmm.
I do just the idea of sending a decertification letter on stationery is funny to me. I don't know that anyone would actually just send a letter on stationery like that, but that's funny. But also the Dante reference that's kind of buried in there. I love the idea of there being a CFE's club that's named after the 8th Circle of Hell. That really cracked me up.
Yeah. For those who don't know, the 8th Circle of Hells where people who commit fraud go in Dante. Yeah,
there's a lot going on in that paragraph. So yeah, I'm curious to hear what all you want to talk about with that.
Well, what I found interesting about this paragraph is that he capitalizes both the law, like the T and the L in law, and then he also capitalizes the component letters in the light of truth.
Yeah.
And so I thought to myself, like, okay, that feels like it's not just saying like the law as a like vague sort of like what is legal and what is not legal, and then the light of truth is just sort of like a allegory to, you know, as a certified fraud examiner, you investigate and you bring about the truth that they're committing fraud, like rather than it being about that. What I found, which is fascinating, because the Pinch on Wiki has no comments on this, but there is something called the light of truth, which if this is a reference to anything, let me restart my thoughts here. If this is a reference to anything, it is a reference to In the Light of Truth, the Grail message, which was written by a German named Oscar Ernst Bernhardt, who believed that he was the Messiah of the Jewish people. And this text that he wrote called The Light of Truth was his series of lectures that were meant to illuminate the true nature of God's creation. Now, the law is also a term in Judaism for the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, where the 661 mitzvot are codified. And so this concept of Maxine depicting that the light of truth is coming to alter the law would also scan properly to what this particular guy, Ernst, was doing. Through these lectures and through his writing, he was altering the understanding of creation and the understanding of the law that the Jewish people lived by through his personal messianic cult that he was trying to create. Now, the fascinating thing about this is that in the final days and years of its composition, this thing that Oscar was putting together, he was actually shut down by the Gestapo when the Nazis came to power in Germany. they were afraid of the potential for a zealous belief to infect the Jewish population and convince them to fight back. And so they forced him to stop writing, and the actual full In the Light of Truth message wasn't published until decades later. And he had died by that point, but he continued teaching underground at the time. So, you know, if Maxine is seeing the light of truth as potentially burning the law in a Hebrew context, the law refers to the Torah. The light of truth would have to replace the Torah if accepted. It's possible that Pynchon is trying to draw an allegory between this and the fact that as Maxine investigates, she is going to attempt to bring about an alteration to the established law, the established sort of creation that we live in and that is allowed to exist. And, you know, sort of getting into the idea of departure as we get to that later in the book, and how that has a fundamentally, you know, massively altering concept of not just like creation, but existence as a person, and the different kind of end of history elements to get into with the 9/11 angle. Seems like there's a potential specific reference that he's pulling there. So that is what I was able to come up with on the logo for the CFE.
Really interesting. I was not aware of any of that.
Yeah.
So, I had not considered this until you mentioned in particular that the law and light of truth are capitalized.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have the capital T and the capital L being inverted. And for some reason, all of this reminds me quite a bit of the pre-Socratic notion in philosophy, primarily used by Heraclitus, of the logos being, I think, that the most accessible analogy to the way he used it is, if anyone's aware of Taoism, the Tao in Taoism, just this sense of continuity between the right things. And that's a really, anybody who's read any scholarship on Heraclitus is going to think I don't understand it. And no, I just don't know how to phrase it. But especially in the context of the law being, in that Judaic tradition, don't know why that's the word I chose to use. It reminds me a lot of the kind of discussions of, the death of God that we got into at the end of the Crying of Lot 49.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that obviously Maxine is flipping the kind of the self-evident implied meaning of the logo, being, you read the books with truth. And she's flipping that around to, the truth is being destroyed, or the law is being destroyed as the truth is the kind of the inverse interpretation of the law.
Yeah, I think that's good additional context too. Yeah, there's definitely something going on with that particular description. To assume that it's just what's on the page seems wrong to me.
There's so much.
Yeah, 100%. Anything about chapter 2 before we step into chapter 3?
I did like the bad accountant reference at the end. I think the Pension Wiki links that to that movie, Bad Lieutenant, with Harvey Keitel, which I haven't seen, but I have seen the
Nicolas Cage
2009.
one.
Yeah, I've seen the Nicolas Cage one, which is maybe not the most unhinged Nicolas Cage performance, but it's definitely up there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did like that kind of little reference there.
Will, what about you?
I was just going to say that back at the beginning of the chapter, some of the compliments that Reg gets on his pirated videos are based in, to quote, the Neo-Brechtian subversion of the diegesis.
Yeah.
And I see a lot of that. I see a lot of the discussion of Reg, because obviously there's the Seinfeld reference. Like that I think is maybe not the primary way to read it, but I think it's a lot of it. But I think the other way is that it's very much like a commentary on these chapters themselves. These chapters are in that kind of film jargon. It is these chapters are like incredibly discursive, zooming in on these random characters to set up the expectation that none of this is real in a tangible sense, but it's very real in an emotional sense.
Yeah.
And I love that lamp shading. It's just good lamp shading.
Yeah, I like that a lot actually, because it does kind of line up with how Pynchon writes, which you kind of were just saying is the Pynchon kind of will zoom in on weird details at times, and the focus of like, you know, if what we're reading is, and I think in Gravity's Rainbow this is a little bit more directly part of the reading experience, but you can kind of feel like it's like the camera's like zooming in on different parts, and with Pynchon, you know, like it's a lot like you were saying, it's a lot more discursive than most other people's writing. Even the flashbacks and stuff can kind of scan as maybe a bit random at times, or maybe not random, but just like with Reg's bootlegs, it kind of follows its own internal logic.
Yeah, somewhat paradoxical. Like it shouldn't work, but it does. Cody, anything on chapter 2 before we step into chapter 3 that you want to make sure we brought up?
No, I don't think so. This, like I said earlier, I think this whole chapter just has a very hard-boiled kind of feel to it in the way it's set up and presented, and obviously that's an element that runs through the rest of the story, but very noticeable here, and I think really highlights his love of that genre, which is always a good thing for me. I love that genre as well, so having him kind of play with it as well is always a fun read.
I do love the inversion of the detective being a woman, and instead of a femme fatale walking in, it's just some guy.
Yes.
Great. So that brings us to chapter 3. You have this note here, Pynchon and Judaism. Can someone shine more context on this for me and the listeners? What were you wondering about, Cody?
That's a good question. I wrote that in somewhat of a fever this morning when I wasn't at my best, feeling really awful. I think there's just a lot of references to Judaism throughout especially this chapter. And not being familiar with it, I don't clock a lot of those references. That's probably more of what that's trying to get at. I don't really remember writing that this morning, so
okay,
I don't know.
Well, chapter 3, we're introduced to Maxine's best friend Heidi, and in sort of a wine-fueled reminiscence, they talk about the relationship between Horst and Maxine. I'm gonna say it like that every time. And we learn that Horst it just had a lot of money and kind of only ever saw problems as something to be solved with money. And as soon as Maxine kind of realized that that was kind of what the life that they were going to live was, she didn't want to be viewed as a problem to be solved, and so the marriage just kind of dissolved. And Heidi is potentially interested in hooking up with Horst. So that's some of their drama. We do get a lot of backstory on Heidi, which is where I think a lot of your like Jewish questions come from, Cody.
Probably, yeah.
Does anyone?
Good way to put it.
Does anyone have any thoughts? Any thoughts on Heidi's backstory?
So I didn't catch it on my first read or the reading prior to this, but while we were talking about the Ambopedia section, I did catch that. I think that's kind of saying that she was the one who was booked to be on the cruise. And I do think that there is quite a bit of borderline in the character of Heidi.
Mm-hmm.
Because she is, and as a reader, not in the diagnostic sense, as a reader, she really hits on a borderline between infuriating and lovable. And I think that's a hard thing to do with a character.
Yeah, really in a way that only like sister relationships can be. As someone with two sisters. even though they're not actually related. They act like they're related. Certainly, the two of them. Yeah, do you have any, like, I would love to answer your questions about Judaism, Cody, but I feel like it would require you to have something more fully formed.
I'd have to have something more cohesive than whatever it is I was thinking at the time. Yeah, I mean, again, this morning was a real wild, just fever dream up until about 2:00 in the afternoon.
Yeah.
So the fact that I got I did most of these notes earlier. I came back this morning to add some things, and that was one of them. And I didn't even catch that until you brought it up again. And I was like, what the hell? What? I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I'm sure I can come up with something more specific later, but at the moment.
Yeah, there is a lengthy section there about how a lot of these like very neurotic Jewish mothers want their children to be married to not just other Jewish people, but specifically Jews in the same, I don't know how to describe it other than ethnic group of Jews. For people that are not Jewish or don't know about Judaism or just Jewish identity as a cultural and ethnic heritage, there are subgroups of Jews based upon where they went in the diaspora. So the most common subgroup that people will know is an Ashkenazi Jewish person. These are the Jews who in the diaspora went into Europe and like Eastern Europe and Russia and Northern Europe and that whole area. Like I'm so glad I am Jewish talking about this, because saying the stereotypical Jew would really sound bad coming from most people. But like this stereotypical kind of like Jewish person you may think of when somebody mentions like a Jewish person, like is likely an Ashkenazi Jewish person. Then there are Sephardi Jews, and those are the Jews who in the diaspora went to places like Spain or Portugal or other sort of more Spanish speaking areas. And then you have the Jews that when the diaspora happened went into like Northern Africa and other areas of the Levant, and that is the Mizrahi Jews. So those are like the three biggest sort of classifications of diaspora Jews. And there are Jewish parents who are really obsessed with making sure that their kids not just marry sort of a Jewish person, but a Jewish person in the same cultural tradition, because to get real inside baseball and practicing Judaism, depending upon where you come from in the diaspora, what group of Jews you're from, you will have different traditions. You'll have different prayer books. You'll have different like orders to holidays and celebrations. You'll have different like specific, fasting days maybe. The traditions are similar. They're linked. Sephardi Jews see Ashkenazi Jews as also Jews, and vice versa. But because of the cultural heritage and familial tradition there, in a lot of cases, it is strongly encouraged by Jewish parents for their children to marry within the same kind of faith tradition. Same would be true of like denominations in Judaism. Like if you're an Orthodox Jew, it's strongly encouraged for you to marry another Orthodox Jew. And if an Orthodox Jew marries a liberal or Reform Jew, like that's kind of a controversial thing. So I like it seems as though, all of that is to say, it seems as though Pynchon is kind of making a joke about that narrow obsession with like, it needs to be this specific kind of Jew. It can't just be any. And kind of the lengths that some people would be willing to go to make sure that their children not just marry someone of the same ethnicity and same religion, but also of the same, like subgroup in that realm.
Gotcha.
One thing that I picked up on from I was just reading a few minutes ago, some of the comments on the Pynchon subreddit group read of Bleeding Edge, and somebody mentioned at the beginning of the novel could be a reference to the Kabbalah Tree of Life, with the light coming through the tree being like Kether. which that does. I don't remember this novel well enough to really be able to think in my head if the the journey of the novel could be mapped onto the Kabbalistic tree of life. It's something I'll probably try to be thinking about as we go on. Just from what little I know about the tree of life, it also strikes me that Malkuth could be a somewhat similar, like, we in the tree of life you kind of go down into, like, I think Malkuth is, I don't, it's not like the underworld, but it's like the bottom of the tree of life, and that could it also kind of reminds me of the internet, with we get all these discussions of the surface web and the deep web, which I don't, I'm having trouble kind of relating the tree of life to the surface web and the deep web, but like there is kind of a journey into the underworld aspect of this novel that I think could be related to Kabbalah and stuff like that.
Yeah, it could be. I'm not opposed to that idea. I can't say that in my reading of this book I've come across it, but when I practiced Judaism, I wasn't super into the Kabbalah or the Zohar. So yeah, something to look forward to, or to look out for as we continue.
Yeah, and it might not even, it might have something to do with the structure of this book, but it could also be, since it is so early and since it is so brief, it could be a reference to the way that the Tree of Life is discussed in Gravity's Rainbow.
Mm-hmm. True.
So do any of you think that Daytona might be onto something? Do you think that mayonnaise might inhibit the effects of cannabis?
I think so. I think she's absolutely correct. I also feel like maybe it would have been a lot more fun if some of Jimi Hendrix's lyrics were about mayonnaise.
I'm surprised Weird Al never did like a Jimi Hendrix mayonnaise song. There's something there.
Perhaps that's the one artist he views as sacred.
Maybe.
Which I guess if you're going to pick only one, Jimi Hendrix is about as good a choice as any.
Pretty good one, yeah. But also that does continue Pynchon's obsession with mayonnaise.
Look, mayonnaise is not bad.
It's really not. I like mayonnaise, but it's hard. Like, it's hard for me to like it when I read, stuff like the mayonnaise jelly bean from Gravity's Rainbow and
gross. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not a mayonnaise hater, but I do agree entirely with Pynchon that it might be as close as wasps have to original sin. The way it's used, at least.
Which, yeah. as a wasp himself, he's trying to atone for that by constantly deriding mayonnaise in his books. That all of that's discussion with sort of Heidi and Horst is a good chunk of this chapter.
It really is.
Until we get up to the stuff with the Deseret, which is another case of New York being a character. The Deseret is obviously, if we go back to like the Crazy Eddie thing from earlier in this chapter, or in this set of chapters, it is obviously a stand-in for a building that they literally point out in the chapter, where it's introduced as the Deseret has always made the Dakota look like a Holiday Inn. The Dakota is a very famous apartment building that's right on Central Park. So the idea that there is something that is so magisterial it makes that look like garbage is quite a big statement from Pynchon on what the Deseret is like. And we just sort of get the history of sort of her and Heidi's obsession with this building and trying to get into it, and they've never been able to. That really takes on more of a relevance later in the book, but it is sort of introduced here.
Really interesting that it's called the Deseret. This actually just occurred to me. Because the Deseret, the term Deseret is important to Latter-day Saints, the Mormon Church. I believe that Utah was originally called Deseret, and it's Utah is basically the Mormon Holy Land, more or less. I mean, I'm probably simplifying and maybe a bit wrong there, but it's their home. It's their home. It's where their religion is based. So like that would make this Heidi and Maxine are obsessed with this apartment complex or apartment buildings that, it's like their holy land. It's like their promised land that they can't wait to get into.
Yeah, that's awesome. Super good context to include there. And I mean, also if we're again talking about the WASP industrial complex, Mormonism is a big part of that.
Yep.
Yeah, so that's just something else that the Pynchon is keeping in mind there. There is an interesting inclusion in the Pynchon wiki about the Deseret building too, that it's probably styled after a building called the Apthorpe, which, what the hell of a name is that? If it's that sounds like something that'd be in a Pynchon novel. But apparently, other than the gargoyles and the turrets, the description from the Deseret really matches that building. And evidently, according to this guy named Boris Kochka, Pynchon himself lived in an apartment that faced that building. So it's possible that some of the longing from afar is based certainly in the real life of Thomas Pynchon.
Yeah, and further citing from the Pynchon wiki, if Deseret means honeybee and is used as a symbol next to the beehive, then it can kind of be framed as the way that, as you phrased it earlier, Kata, the WASP apparatus kind of engenders its standards for success and its standards for morality across the entirety of American cultural hegemony.
Yeah, couldn't have said it better myself. Cody, you really like the last 3 lines of chapter 3?
I do. I think it's again going to that kind of hard-boiled, leave it on a cliffhanger type of thing. Where they, I heard it's run by the mob. Which mob exactly, Heidi? And what difference does it make? Plenty, as it would turn out. Very. It has that, just very like Hammett Chandler kind of like setting up for what's coming, and I can almost hear the sort of if this were like a movie like Maltese Falcon or The Big Sleep or something like that, you can hear the sort of orchestral sting, the swell real quick of going into the next scene. I appreciate that little ending there.
Yeah, it reminded me, what came to mind when I read that this time through was the music that played in the Twilight Zone before commercials.
Oh,
and then it fades out to an ad about Bosco chocolate syrup or whatever.
I was taking it even further back when I was reading it. It sounded more like the old detective stories on the radio, and they would kind of play like a little musical bit, a little music sting before the commercials came on.
Yeah, before you heard about Chesterfield cigarettes.
the best cigarette, doctor recommended. Only the healthiest pregnant women smoke Chesterfields.
Absolutely. Well, any remaining thoughts that anyone has from chapters 1 through 3 before we go into funny parts?
For chapter 3, it does surprise me that Maxine wasn't more upset with Heidi for going out with her ex-husband. It is shown that there's a history there of Heidi perhaps intentionally wronging Maxine and Maxine kind of ignoring it and just kind of letting it simmer in her brain and not doing anything about it. So Maxine just seems, like in chapter 2, she's obviously very upset by the divorce, and I don't know. I just putting myself in Maxine's place. I'm not sure I would stay friends with somebody. I mean, I guess that Maxine and Heidi, like y'all were saying, are kind of like siblings. They've been friends since childhood, which I don't have much experience with having friends for that long, especially not ones that continually wrong me. It just struck me as perhaps, I don't know, it just struck me as odd, I guess, that Maxine isn't more upset by that.
Yeah, I think Will really hit the nail on the head earlier when he said that it was Heidi who was supposed to go on the Borderline cruise. So if we're looking at Heidi as someone who potentially has BPD as a character, that does lend some credence to why Maxine would continue being friends with her, from a standpoint of like, well, she does have this condition, like it's gonna cause her to potentially act irrationally. For me to abandon her because of that would sort of seem overly cruel potentially. And I mean, it doesn't even seem as though Heidi was successful. In fact, she asks Maxine for his phone number, which she doesn't give her. So it is entirely possible that the whole thing is like a delusion that she's going through as well, related to that BPD. But I do really like the quote in chapter 3 about their relationship. I highlighted this one, which kind of adds additional context to the sort of relationship you're talking about, Luke. Or on chapter 25, it says, they shake their heads at each other. Without needing a mirror, Maxine knows they look like a couple of depraved grandmas. An untypical adjustment to have to make, their roles being usually a little bit more glamorous. At some point earlier in their relationship, which has been forever, Maxine understood that she was not the princess here. Heidi wasn't either, of course, but Heidi didn't know that. In fact, she thought she was the princess, and furthermore has come over the years to believe that Maxine is the princess's slightly less attractive, wacky sidekick. Whatever the story of the moment happens to be, Princess Hydrophobia is always the lead babe, while Lady Maxipad is the fast-mouthed soubrette, the heavy lifter, the practical elf who comes while the princess is sleeping, or more typically, distracted, and gets the real work of the princessipality done. So it seems as though, Maxine has an understanding that Heidi is not a completely rational person and is going to behave as such, but she kind of is almost a caretaker for her, and is willing to do that just to kind of make sure that her experience in life isn't probably overly negative as a result of the condition that she may or may not have.
And even ignoring Heidi's possible mental health issues, we have to consider a lot of this book is from deep within Maxine's perspective. And if you go about your life as paranoid as a Thomas Pynchon novel would be, which again, this book is almost all from her perspective, you're probably not a very, you obviously you have feelings, you can feel pain, but you're probably also, once she's off the couch, once she's off the cruise, she's probably mentally prepared for that kind of betrayal.
Mm-hmm. True. Anything else?
There is one line that I think confirms our previous theorizing, Kate, and that is describing hechsures as kosher logos.
Yeah, there you go. Very good find.
Just tie all the puns together.
Definitely. Speaking of puns, any funny parts that we didn't go over as a result of reading the chapters through?
Yeah, I think we touched on the Ambipedia scene, but there's a paragraph in there that really got me on page 13. At the first seating for dinner that evening, she found a crowd in the mood to party, gathered beneath the banner, reading Welcome Borderlines. The captain appeared nervous and kept finding excuses to spend time under the tablecloth of his table. About every minute and a half, a DJ queued up the semi-official Ambipedia anthem, Madonna's Borderline, 1984, with everybody joining in on the part that goes, over the borderline, with a peculiar emphasis on the final N sound, some sort of tradition Maxine imagined. Pynchon does a really good job writing people stuck in uncomfortable situations and not knowing what to do, and then just kind of building on that. And I think that's a great example of that. I don't remember that Madonna song either. I don't know if maybe I've just not heard it, or it's just I don't know. It seems like it would be a real song, but I have not heard that one.
Do you spend a lot of time listening to Madonna, Cody?
Not anymore. I had my time.
I appreciate the honesty.
That was going to be my funny part, the one that you just chose. And it did occur to me to go back to the whole why Pynchon chose that particular disorder for the cruise, is that it was just a setup for the Madonna reference, which I think that's definitely possible. And it is just kind of funny to me to picture like Pynchon. I think Borderline came out in the 80s, the song.
I just found it. It was on her first album.
Yeah, so it is kind of funny to me to picture Pynchon like jamming out to early Madonna in the 80s and loving it so much that 20, 30 years later he includes it in a novel.
Yeah, the specifics on how they're singing the word borderline, it's almost reminiscent of like imagining sitting in like a karaoke bar and just being amazed
Yeah.
at how badly this person is singing this one song. Almost like he saw someone singing it this way and was like, well, gotta put this somewhere because I can't be the only one to hear about somebody going,
Well, also, this just occurred to me too, and maybe Kate can speak to what I'm about to talk about, but I think it was Cody said that Pynchon really writes people in uncomfortable situations well, but that does remind me of David Foster Wallace's, what was it, an uncomfortable thing I'll never do again? What is it called?
Supposedly fun thing I'll never do
Supposedly
again.
fun thing I'll never do again, which is him on a cruise.
Yeah, it's a great essay.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me if that's kind of a veiled reference to that essay, the whole cruise part.
I actually, I wasn't gonna mention it because I would basically talk endlessly about it, but I think the Dynasty characters are referenced to Infinite Jest because there's a very long section of Infinite Jest about a guy who's obsessed with MASH, to the point where his obsession with MASH is a mental illness that like his doctors are trying to learn how to treat. So I would not be surprised if there's some degree of reference, not only just in that character, but that whole kind of tableau. So, quotes? Who wants to go first?
I'll go first, but I also have one from We Live in Public because I did my homework and I watched it.
Thank you.
And it's very good. It is. I do think it. I absolutely see where you're coming from in its relation to this. Aside from the actual mention of Josh Harris, but I never really like knowing Gabriel Ice is kind of built off of him makes so much sense and adds a lot more to that character. So that's really interesting. But there's a line in there, like almost halfway through, right before there's a very big sort of climax and breakdown in the project that he has going on, where he says, as time goes by, we're going to increasingly have our lives exposed in very personal and intimate ways, and we'll want that to happen. I think that really kind of grabbed my attention and stuck out to me, especially in what some of what this book is getting at and where things have gone with the internet today. I think that's a very relevant quote. But as far as my quote from the book itself now, I think I'm going to go with on pages 27 and 28 when it's talking about the desert. Kind of cutting in a little bit into it here, but the place has obsessed Maxine for as long as she can remember. She grew up across the street from where it still looms over the neighborhood, trying to pass as just another stolid example of Upper West Side apartment house. 12 stories in a full square block of sinister clutter, helical fire escapes at each corner, turrets, balconies, gargoyles, scaled and serpentine and fanged creatures in cast iron over the entrances and coiled around the windows. In the central courtyard stands an elaborate fountain, surrounded by a circular driveway big enough to allow a couple of stretched limos to sit there and idle, with room left over for a Rolls Royce or two. Film crews come here to shoot features, commercials, series, blasting huge volumes of light into the unappeasable maw of the entranceway, keeping everybody for blocks around up all night. Though Ziggy claims to have a classmate who lives there, it's far from Maxine's social circle. Key money, even for a studio in the desert, is said to run at $300,000 and up. Just that description of that building, like it, again, we've talked so much about New York as a character in here, but I think this is such a good example of his ability to write that and to really make you feel that like you're standing in front of that building and just absorbing everything that it has to offer. Beautifully written.
It is a great one. My quote comes from page 12. It's talking about how she ended up on the cruise. I just love this paragraph for a number of reasons, but I'll start with reading it. This was a point you always got to with Reg. First time they met was on a cruise, if you think of cruise in maybe more of a specialized way. In the wake of her separation, back in what still wasn't quite the day, from her then husband, Horst Loeffler. After too many hours indoors, the blinds drawn, listening on endless repeat to Stevie Nicks singing Landslide on a compilation tape she ignored the rest of, drinking horrible Crown Royal Shirley Temples and chasing them with more grenadine directly from the bottle, and going through a bushel per day of Kleenex, Maxine finally allowed her friend Heidi to convince her that a Caribbean cruise would somehow upgrade her mental prognosis. One day she went sniffling down the hall from her office and into the In and Out travel agency, where she found undusted surfaces, beat-up furniture, disheveled model of an ocean liner that shared a number of design elements with the RMS Titanic. I really love that paragraph, specifically the middle of it, where it says, after too many hours indoors with the blinds drawn, and just sort of like that description of Maxine's sort of grieving of their relationship. It's just very visceral, but also very, very realistic, in my opinion. Like, just listening to the same like sad song on repeat, making really bad health decisions as far as what you're drinking or eating, and just crying profusely. Like, specifically the fact that she's chasing a Crown Royal Shirley Temple, which is already gross, with more grenadine that's directly from the bottle. Like, it's just such a great like character beat there of just like, yep, I know exactly what you're talking about, John.
Yep.
And then with that sort of seamless transition into like, I'm going to do something for myself. I'm going to get away, and then just you're in a nightmare. Just a Lynchian nightmare as soon as you walk into that office. Luke, what about you?
So yeah, mine I already kind of touched on, but mine comes from page 1. As Maxine watches, sunlight finds its way past roof lines and water tanks to the end of the block and into one particular tree, which all at once is filled with light. I really like the imagery there. Yeah, and I mean, it's just kind of a beautiful little snapshot of New York City in the morning.
And Will, I let you go last this time.
Well, it's convenient you did, because you did steal mine.
Oh, did I?
Yeah, I really...
It begins.
It begins, indeed. I do love that section, and it really feels like kind of the final evolution, again, presuming that he doesn't publish anything else, of his, kind of list-style descriptions from earlier in his career as an author, kind of melding with the better sense of how to convey personality. It's just excellent. But I back up. It's a little bit later. Reg and Maxine find their way eventually to the onboard casino, where people in ill-fitting tuxedos and gowns are playing roulette and baccarat, chain-smoking, leering back and forth, and grimly waving fistfuls of make-believe money. Jujubes, they're informed. Generic, undiagnosed James Bond syndrome. Whole different support group. Hasn't made it into the DSM yet, but they're lobbying maybe the 5th edition. Always welcome here at convention time, mostly for the stability. See what I'm saying? Actually, Maxine didn't, but bought a $5 chip and walked away from the table with enough, had it been real money, for a short trip to Saks if and when she was lucky enough to get back off of this. And that's one, as I mentioned earlier, I love the joke of calling this very silly theoretical diagnosis jujubes, but also I just love the way that the pacing of that paragraph goes.
Yeah, it's a great one.
Mm-hmm.
Most Sean part of the chapter.
For me, it was describing, and hold on, let me get this right. Horst as both an emotional as a grain elevator and also later as a big alexithymic lug, which that was one of those, I had no idea what that word meant, but it works perfectly. So basically it is someone who is unable to identify or describe emotions in themselves, which speaks a lot about Horst, as we'll find out later as the book goes on. But yeah, that's such a really great description of a person, those two descriptors.
Definitely. Will, what about you? Your most pinch on part of the chapter?
Well, I for these 3 chapters, and I predict for the rest of the book, it's going to be pretty tricky to find a particular section, because a lot of this book is extremely Pinchonian.
Yeah.
Like, just very much him diving into what his hallmarks are, I guess. But if I have to pick one, and it's not something that we've already discussed much, it's going to have to be the way that Heidi became fixated on imitating Natalie Wood in an attempt to learn Spanish.
Yeah.
It's just the type of characterization, that type of like fascination with the details of pop culture. Just really can't imagine anyone else writing that.
Yeah, that's a good one. I would say my most pinch on part of the chapter is just the different ways in which he plays with the hard boiled genre. Like it's such a Pinchonian thing to like very clearly telegraph his love for that genre while also subverting it between like the cheesy chapter ending, you know, with that kind of implied musical sting, or the fact that, you know, it's not a femme fatale that comes and visits the detective, but just like it's just some guy. Or the fact that, like, you know, her secretary is like this sassy detective secretary taken to a level that is
Turned up to 11.
insane, to the degree where it's not just sass, but it's also just genuine anger.
Yeah.
So I think that, like, yeah, a lot of those things would feel maybe a bit chintzy in a writer of lesser capability, but because of Pynchon's understanding of that genre and the fact that he's been subverting it for 60 years, basically, really seems uniquely him. Luke, what about you?
Yeah, mine is probably the description of Greg being chased down by I think an NYU professor, maybe it's City College, and being told that, you know, that whole quote about the diegesis and everything, because it does seem to be kind of a send up of academia, kind of making fun of academia.
Oh yeah, totally.
Which Pynchon, I don't think really focuses on too much, but it definitely, I could see him kind of having a distaste for academia. And also, I mean, the reference to Brecht is I liked. I don't have a lot of experience with Brecht. I did take a class where we spent a week going over him in college. But the Pynchon Wiki points out that like scholars have linked Pynchon's character names with Brecht's alienation effect, which part of that alienation effect is reminding you that you're consuming a piece of art while you're consuming it, that, you know, what you're reading or watching or whatever is artificial and is not real life, which is something that Pynchon kind of repeatedly does, and that he definitely does with his character names, especially. So I did kind of like it as kind of a meta, maybe nod to, like, while he's making fun of scholars, he's also kind of doing this meta nod to past scholarship that has referenced him.
Well, all of that brings us to sort of the end of our show. But over the course of our break, we did receive a lot of correspondence from everybody. A lot of new social media followers as well. Thank you to everyone who's following us on Twitter or, you know, Instagram or YouTube if you're watching us there. All the new listeners. It's been really awesome to see our audience growing in real time, so to speak. So we're just gonna kind of go through all of these one at a time. We'll just kind of circle through everybody. If everyone wants to read one, I'll start here. We got a Apple Podcast review from someone named Huntle _ the title of which was just loquacious, and then the text of said review was 2 words. But Huntle _ did give us 5 stars, so thank you.
Yeah.
You know, I'm glad you're enjoying the show and our loquacious nature.
Maybe that should be. We should rewrite the intro and just call ourselves a loquacious examination of books.
A highly fixated, loquacious review of large, dense books.
Yeah. We should make that. It needs to be wordier at the beginning.
Luke, do you want to read the email from John here in the notes?
That sounds good. Hi, all. Really loving the discussions. Pension is relatively new to me, and I'm really digging your analysis and approach. The Dinner with Will and Kate episode was truly excellent and incredibly insightful, and I learned a ton. And I was curious if anyone had that link to the unnamed chorus syllabus that Will had mentioned, the one that started with Mason and Dixon and ending with Don Quixote. That seemed really intriguing, and I'd love to pick up on it. Anyways, thanks for all you do. Really appreciate your thorough commentary. All best, John.
If I'm not mistaken, John, we reached out to you with that
I did,
link.
yeah.
Great.
I'll put it in the show notes too for anyone else who's curious about it.
Cody, the next thing is about your bonus episode, so
Yeah.
it's fitting that you would read it.
So we got an email from James, who also reached out to us after the first bonus episode I did on Near Automata. And he says, hi, just wanted to get back and say I've been listening to the podcast in tandem with my third reread of Vineland. I already love rereading the novel because of how rich it is with new details that emerge each time, and your discussions are pushing that into overdrive. These books are kind of made to be talked about, and in lieu of having any IRL pinch-on obsessives who I still get to hang out with regularly anymore, these episodes have been a nice alternative. It helps that my obsessive love of Twin Peaks and Sonic Youth are also covered for. Dude, if we lived in the same area, I'm sure we'd hang out. That's awesome. The music talk this season has been particularly great so far. I was curious whether any of you ever listen to music while reading. I try not to make a huge habit out of it, but instrumental music tends to help tune out any noise that might distract me. And I always make an effort to find something that I feel fits atmospherically or thematically with the book. For anyone reading who might be interested, a few of my choice albums for Vineland, and we'll go through those in a minute. This is me writing that. I feel very seen here. I absolutely listen to music when I read. I have to, otherwise my brain wanders and I can't focus. I find that music helps kind of lock in that part of my brain that would otherwise wander, and allows me to focus. And I 100% do try to fit what I'm listening to with what I'm reading. I think I shared with Kate. I made a Twin Peaks playlist on Tidal that I use when I read a lot of stuff. I feel like that music fits so well with a lot of stuff. But yeah, I tend to listen to a lot of jazz. I'll put on anything from like Sonny Rollins or Miles Davis. Wes Montgomery and Grant Green are pretty regular background music plays. I find film scores are really good to listen to sometimes, as well as I have a lot of video game soundtracks saved, and I'll make playlists of like the more ambient or atmospheric parts of those. And I pulled a bunch of like Nine Inch Nails and Trent Reznor's film score work. I compiled that into a playlist as well. So yeah, I 100% have music on while I read. I feel like it really adds a layer of ambience to whatever it is I'm reading, and it is very vital for me, I find. I don't know about the rest of y'all.
I don't. I do like very occasionally. And it's pretty much the same answer as you, Cody. I'll put on a lot of film scores primarily, or like ambient like electronic music or jazz. But I do go out in public and I read in bars a lot, so I am often forced to listen to music while I'm reading. But it is not by choice. It is by the fact that there are not many bars that are quiet.
Yeah, it's not a common occurrence for me, but when I do it, it's usually the ambient electronic kind of genre, particularly like Mort Garson albums.
Oh, nice.
If people want to dig into like a pseudonymous artist, he's a great one. All of his different albums are good reading music.
Yeah, that soundtrack Did You Hear is excellent.
Yeah, it is.
I don't listen to music too much when I read. It's maybe if I'm on a plane or something, I will. I do occasionally though. Usually if I am listening to music while I'm reading, it's something like Clams Casino, which is like kind of like atmospheric trap beats, which is maybe an oversimplification of the music of Clams Casino. But Or also, I have a friend from high school who has kind of gained a little bit of notoriety in the ambient music sphere. Um, he's really into sci-fi and stuff like that. So I do like listening to his music whenever I'm reading sci-fi. His Spotify handle his band name is E_J_R_M, so EJRM, which I think stands for Elton John's Rocket Man. But it's just, yeah, his band name is
Nice.
EJRM. And it's just kind of chill, very ambient music, which I do highly recommend his stuff.
Oh, I guess one more shout out for particular artists for reading too would be Sigur Rós. I can't
Ooh, yes.
think of any that are better than that.
Yeah, that Parentheses album, I will often put that one on.
Well, James has some album recommendations for us, Cody.
Yeah. So first is The Expanding Universe by Laurie Spiegel, pioneering electronic music. I cannot talk. Pioneering electronic music emerging out of the countercultural arts experiment going on at Bell Laboratories in the 70s. Liner notes are really interesting, outlining Spiegel's philosophy around the computer as a folk instrument. Rayon Hula by Mike Cooper. Too fascinating a character to get into too much detail. Mike Cooper's musical career spans across 7 decades. What shit. Yeah, and this album in particular is a kind of haunted ambient music take on Polynesian Hawaiian music, not dissimilar to what Caretaker does with old ballroom records. When the Roses Come Again by Daniel Bachman. I was introduced to this guy through a monthly album listening club I go to, and this sounds to me like those towering pine trees on the first edition cover of Vineland. American folk guitar playing blended with noise and drone. That sounds cool as hell. Last American Hero by James Ferraro. This is basically the concept of a Thanatoid distilled down to music. Then he says, this message ended up being a bit longer than I'd planned. Needless to say, though, I can't wait for the Bleeding Edge season. I feel that book is kind of underappreciated in much the same way Vineland was for a long time. There's something about the specific tone of that book, especially the way it engages with the Gothic, that feels distinct from everything else in Pynchon's bibliography. Keep up the good work, folks. Kind regards, James. Thank you, James. You sound like a cool dude. I'm sure, like I said, if we were in the same area, we'd hang out because, like, anyone who's into Sonic Youth and Twin Peaks, awesome. You're doing good. Keep it up.
Will, do you want to read this YouTube comment?
Sure. So this is from, I believe it's Space Shanty Now.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, how fortunate to come across this episode of your podcast about Vineland just as I finished listening to it today and wanted to reflect on it some more. I had read it about 12 years ago and really enjoyed it. Seeing as how Paul Thomas Anderson had recently wrapped up shooting his adaptation of the novel here in my neighborhood, I thought giving the book a go via audiobook would be fun. I really appreciated hearing you folks discuss the book with your rich knowledge of Pynchon's other works and the associated cultural influences that may have played a part in his inspiration for the novel. The only other book of his that I have read was The Crying of Lot 49. This being mostly due to its brevity and my general difficulty in reading that is sort of related to dyslexia, I suppose, everything else recommended of his being much longer. But I think because of the way I read, which often has me dwelling on certain words and sentences a bit, I kind of get hypnotized by Pynchon's prose. I really enjoy the speed at which his words can conjure up a visual or feeling and propel one along. It feels very precise and deliberate and not fluffy filler. The words feel very well crafted to elicit a mood and not just there to move a plot. Anyway, I will have to now go back and listen to your earlier discussions on this book and I suppose other Pynchon novels. I kind of want to read/listen to Mason and Dixon next, unless one could recommend something else of his that expands on sort of the U.S. destiny and obscure interconnectedness of people and institutions. A final thought here, too, is having lived in Humboldt County since 2001 and California my whole life, there was a great appeal in reading how Pynchon squeezed Vineland into our geography and seemed to tastefully capture a culture and counterculture that for the most part hasn't changed here since he wrote the book. I would love to go on about all the really cool observations you folks made, but I am a slow typist. It was just really fun to hear your discussion and make many great observations. Cheers. And yeah, thank you. I mean, if you're a slow typist, we appreciate the effort, because it's a lot of interesting thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I would say if you're looking for something else of his that expands on sort of the U.S. destiny and obscure interconnections of people and institutions, that's Against the Day. But that's also his biggest book. So I'm sure the audiobook is good. I haven't listened to it, but you may want to check that out. But that's 100%. That's that.
On a microscopic level, compared to Against the Day, Inherent Vice would also be very applicable there, with the connection between the local LAPD and the FBI and land development and the mob in Vegas and all of that. So I would say that would be a slightly more digestible track to take than Against the Day, if that feels daunting.
I do want to circle back, though, mentioning PTA wrapping shooting the adaptation. Given that I think that comment came from right at the end of our Vineland discussion, from what I have seen of the developments of PTA's movie, it's looking more and more like I might be right on about it being a very loose adaptation and just taking some of the elements from the story. But I don't know. I'm still curious, but it's looking more and more like it's a sort of oil to There Will Be Blood kind of road that it's going down.
It's not promising in my mind.
Yeah, at least the way it's been talked about in rumors makes me very hesitant.
And also just kind of surprised that he would do that to an author that he very clearly likes a lot.
Yeah. But I think that book deserves everything that's in it, and I don't like the idea of just taking it piecemeal and making it something else.
Yeah, I agree.
But we'll see.
Well, that wraps up the show. Great first episode back, everybody. Great start to the new season. Hopefully everybody enjoys the show as it continues to unfold, and that they can find that new appreciation for Bleeding Edge, like our email said. Seems like we maybe accomplished that with Vineland, and I'm hoping that we can do the same for Bleeding Edge as we continue on. Cody, do you want to let them know what our email is?
Yeah, so we can be reached at mappingthezonepod@gmail.com. If you have any questions or comments, or just anything that you want us to bring up about the book, please let us know, and we'll be happy to discuss it. You can also get us at Twitter at PinchOnPod. And again, if anything you want to talk about, we'll bring it up. Mostly, probably. I'm sure somebody could probably come up with something that we don't want to talk about, but keep it relevant, and we'll go over it. But again, thanks for listening. I'm really excited to dive into this one, and hopefully we can give everyone an enjoyable rereading of this book, or first time reading for those who are reading for the first time.
Yeah, and as an update on your homework, make sure you listen to We Live in Public or watch We Live in Public. It is available for free on Amazon. Or if you have Freevee, I think is what it's technically hosted on, which is it's owned by Amazon. It's a great documentary. It will only gain relevance as we continue on through the book.
Very, very good.
All right, everybody. That's going to be it for chapters 1 through 3. We will see you next week for chapters 4 through 6.
Bye.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Sorry, just need some water.
Get that water. Hell yeah.